consume a little bit of energy with the idea or the hope that this will come back in the next cycle. So we use this cost function and we formulate this as a quadratic, standard quadratic programming. And so what I do is use this function and minimize it in this case. This will give the delta E is the is going to tell me about my numerical optimization. What I get back is delta U, which are the indications of how should the actuator behave in the next X number of times. And these are some of the results. Well, you can say we have the proportional controller, like the analogy of the suspension that is constantly independent of the weight, and we have it adapting. And you can see here, I have zero, I have spikes upwards and spikes downwards. Spikes downward mean that in a certain period of the weight, I'm injecting energy to the float with the expectation of recovering it in the future. So I can do that with an NPC. I cannot do it with a proportional control. And as you can see here in the FPC, I maximize the displacement of the float. So if I maximize that movement or the displacement, I am maximizing the displacement of the actuator and I'm getting more energy. This could be a little bit more clear. This is the amount of energy that I have extracted from the simulation. In this case, are simulations through a period of time. And see that in black is when the system has been working with a proportional control, we control that is constant rigidity. And I have 73.1 joules. And the blue one is the amount of energy that I was able to extract when the system was working under a strategy of control that is adaptive. It's changing according to the profile of the wave. So that's 127, that's around 1.5, 1.6 times higher amount of energy. And here what I have is a summary. And then MPC based on the framework of RTA is real-time iteration to include in the system the efficiency of the PTO and is guaranteed to improve the efficiency of the entire system. Also, as a conclusion, that the results show that this strategy can increase the amount of energy that I can extract from the device. And this, how do I relate this with the title of the presentation? So for a device, I'm able to extract more energy. This means that I can sell that energy cheaper. It's a way of reducing the operational cost of the system. And that is what I brought for you today. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. A very interesting and changing subject. I think those that have the opportunity to see several presentations in the morning. We're really impressed with the work because it's very interesting how you state and all the difficulties and challenges around trying to take advantage of that potential of generating energy from the sea. So I think it's recent testing. Something that perhaps you didn't tell is that it's a project that comes from a student initiative, which I think it's something I like to like forward to use. If you have any questions for my partner, it can state a little bit of our discipline. Maybe taking the time, I could ask you how would you in the country in terms of support? Because I think that is the extra students, I'm sure we have from foreign investors and private investors, private public generators that have seen how to try to exploit this potential in the country. Yeah, my fall short here. In, I would my Dutch has been abroad, so I came back. What you said about the project was born as a student initiative, and everything that we have in the platform has been developed through students. But what I presented here was part of my doctor's degree, so I just reincorporated to the tech recently, relatively recently. So unfortunately, I'm not sure if that's the right word. We were able to place a project through the Vice Dean Office of Research, and from there we have the all the support from the technology. Now answering specifically to the question, I don't know of industry or investors here. I do have knowledge that ISE, I had met with my partner and people from ISE in 2015, 2016. They had an idea of generating this, but I don't know what's this current status it has. According to your international experience, would you say that there is a country where the industry or public companies lead? Because I remember that in the morning they talked about different technology in the world. And I'll open the mic for you in a second. I would say not because I had to lead, but I was saying is are the pioneers and is leading that. Actually, about a month ago, Walter Salter died, who was one of the one that brought back the topic of wave energy. In Scotland specifically, I consider it one of the pioneers in this area. Scotland, the US, um, I am France, another country, but I would consider England as one of the Scotland specifically in the UK. Yeah, I would imagine that the Northern Sea should have a lot of energy there. A little bit out of my comfort area. Very good presentation, very easy to understand the mathematical model I'm going to skip, but I would like to ask you, primarily you mentioned the cost associated to installing this type of systems versus wind or solar. And we know that, for example, in solar, it has a lifespan, the materials, etc., have their own period. For this type of energy production, could we think of having a lifespan of those more extended installations, which could justify the cost in terms of installation? It's very valid, but it, uh, my I don't have the numbers of what is the installation cost right now. What I do see is the cost relative numbers. So we know that ocean energy or revenue is around four times if you compare it to what's LCO, levelized cost of energy, if you compare it to solar or wind. Yeah, thank you very much. Strong applause for a wonderful project. Very interesting and innovative. Trying to renew this energy matrix that also has still a lot of skills to take advantage of the potential that the country has. I would like to ask if we have Taylor or William in the room. We're going to have the following presentation. Mr. Yes, presentation. Okay, we can see Ramon Perez, but and then let's see if he disconnected. Send. Hey, you can do the presentation. Okay. Oh, okay, yours. It's yours. But I can do it. Okay, great. This is the presentation. Social characterization of identification. I understood that Rita was a sociologist, so she had some words to introduce her, but I'll leave with you so you can introduce yourself and give us a bit of context of how sociology is in this entire process. And go ahead with the presentation. Thank you very much. Welcome home. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but we're here. And in our case, it's a research team from the University of Panama that have been doing research interested in inequality. But we started working a series of occupational categories. We started working in occupations. We like that topic on work market. And we realized that fishers particularly river fishes, as it was conceived and census. We had a significant decrease after the development, modernization, etc. has made this thing. So facing this, we want to do an ethnographic study about river fishermen, particularly in the Darien province where we have the largest rivers, two largest rivers. To get to that, we did looking for not only research in bibliographical but also statistics on fisheries in Panama. And that was we were going to present what Rita wanted us to present, the sociological characterization of Panama fishermen as part of the context. So we're going to talk about four key axes: the importance of fishing in the sociological characterization of the fishermen, fishing communities, and regulations, and final reflection. So this is all to go about the topic of fishermen, river fishermen. The importance of fishing, well, removing agriculture in the case of fishing, it's 182 millions according to Catholic, which is what it contributes to the GDP. So there's a perspective that's interesting at sociological level. We start characterizing fishermen. Five out of 10 fishermen are Afro, another 2%, 28, 29% are indigenous, and the rest tend to be in the characteristic of the South Panama, which precisely we have the most number of fishermen. Moving on.
Rita, can you hear us? Let's go. So, what have we detected based on our search? This is the amount of fisheries and fishermen that we have 10,248. We're working as a fisher with as their main job. So it's not someone who is just simply fetching something one random day, but we're talking about their major occupation or job. This is from 2023. From 95% of these are coastal area fishers. So we are closing our action gap here. Then the fishers, we would think that we have a lot of fishers out there in longer range oceanic areas. We are generating a lot more job positions in informal fishers in the coastal areas and subsistence areas. So we have the Atlantic coast with a lot more presence. It has a lot more presence of fishers in the area. Let's remember that this is an island area, very interesting, and have been displaced because of climate change. These were already displaced. And Boca del Toro that stopped being a fishing region to become a touristical spot. So they left fishing and now tourism and all the Pacific area where the majority of the fishers are located. Rita, go ahead. It's a pleasure. Go ahead. Next slide. Now, in terms of gender, it's evident 95% are men. Yes, it is a sector dominated by men, of course. But then ages. I'm worried about ages. The fisher that is less than 14 years old, and mostly th- two of them, they're with longer distances educational. Are we doing within fishers? We can observe based on the data that practically more than half, more than 80%, has less than general basic education. So that means that they haven't even gotten to the medium. It's only fishers that, as we say in our country, that have more problems, as we say in our country, educating fishers. So we have categorized who our fishers are. In Panama, we did this matrix based on the type of fisher, titles or studies, income, and their area where they live, more than 60% is rural area. So let's start with that. There are three categorizations in the census. Used to include river fishers, but that disappeared. On 2010, that was projected as 46. This started reducing. So these are by educational and by income. Let's imagine they don't even get to the minimum wage in the case of Panama. And evidently, there's a combination of Afro indigenous people, mainly rural citizens. Communities, we also started identifying fishing communities, the majority of them in the Pacific coast. Cunayala in the Atlantic is the one that has the most fishers, mostly for survival. But Bocas del Toro is precisely for the Pacific coast. Then we have Cunayala and Boca del Toro. Colon, that is also a port area because of its condition um, coming out of the canal. It was for the commerce and not by the fisheries. And lastly, the last thing that we developed to debate with the research team, generally we are debating about this, is looking at the conditions of the livelihood. We were interested in looking at this. We realized that the household is a necessary site and that should be in optimal conditions to be comfortable. So just for this exercise, we have more dimensions of variables that we have there, but for this exercise, we have established water access, electrical access, and to see the differences between the population and the homes of the population and the fishing household as well. We have symbolic changes here. I believe it's the last slide. Practically have 85% of homes, or 0.85%, in terms of this small index that we developed, this have access. Although, in the case of the fishers, homes lower that index a little bit more just by using these categories that we established for homes. Last one. Here we had something from Rita that tried to look at that decree, the executive decree number 14, the last one coming out on January 24, to be able to observe how this would impact this executive decree, how it affected the art, uh, the fishing. We're closing out because we don't have any more time. And lastly, we have final results in the Darien region, La Palma. We have the San Miguel Gulf, very nice, and the geographical location. The majority of 66% of the fishers in Panama are rural, so that we have to take that into account. Then 86% of the fishers don't even complete basic education levels. In the variable, you have any title? No, none. They don't have any title. Then the income. It's very objective. That basically 73.5% has as an income less than 100 balboas. In this sector, we have an abandonment of the state, but also a market that fails because there's no structures for them to advance to another and following step in improving their livelihood as fishers. So we want to present generally these findings about the fishing in Panama because we know very little about this occupation in Panama. We work with other categories and jobs that have a lot more presence and weight within the national statistics that we're interested in, but we forget about this fishing of the fishers. That is just picking up all this topic of the vision of the different groups that have been marginalized historically following some Dussel policies and Quijano that have actually opened us to see this and look at this population as part of the reinvention of sociology that we have to think about. Rita, if you're around or if you want to say something, if you want to add something. We still have about 5 minutes to share. So we have to understand fishing more than just the economical point of view. So the main stakeholder was the fisher. We have to look at these characteristics that fishers have in the vision, understanding that cultural dynamic where the located and so that we can relate as well type of life they have in their rural areas. At some point, in some projects that fight to understand the fishing from different perspectives. There's one that is open waters, the rivers, and based on that, we're going to have conditions between fishers that are very different. Part of the project is seeing further on other stages why has the river fishing has been lost, but because the subsistence and survival fishing is still there, happening, but in terms of an economical activity, depending on the conditions that these fishers work on, it is a productive activity and that can generate a lot more income based on the socio-economical conditions and social cultural conditions in the population. There are marginal part of what we want to identify and be able to present further on this final end results of the project for this river. Very much repeat that. Well, we have a space for questions. We have the people here. So on the categorization, Paul and Rita, they talk about income, right? And looking at this topic of income, were you able to have a grasp of a dimension of how much is sold from what is fished? And if there is a chain of intermediaries in the commerce of it, and what allows them to solve other basic needs in this population. And fishing is every job has a risk. And have you looked at that aspect of the risk and the routine, good practices of the fishers? Well, the category of the fisher is linked to the income level, so that what we assume is that the income is hand in hand in that category. There's no difference on that. So the proposal here is that if you are a deep sea fisher, you are in a certain range. That is what we consider. But if they use it to sell or not, it's actually linked to the income, how that occupation gives you this amount of income. Now, in terms of the risk, no, we have not worked on that risk. But what surprised us a lot in a qualitative uh, job that we did with Samuel Pinto, the professor, we looked at how this area in the last picture in San Miguel Gulf, how this has lost a lot of natural resources because of the fishing activity. This has been lost from the arrival of the agro industry to the region. They started planting palm tree, rice, and this has producing it has been producing decrease in the type of level of capturing that there can be. That is important to look at it because where am I looking at and towards and closest here is tourism. So the occupation of the fisher is not more than just that job and the occupation that is part of the exercise because I fish because it's the only thing that I have, and I have the ocean available. But if I get a job out there, then I immediately go. So it's that occupation that allows you to advance on it. Now we practically increase to 5,000 fishers in this decade compared to the last one. So I think we are coming back in certain measures to motivate this economy in the durian sector, of course. In the case of the commerce, and the fact that they're asking about the intermediaries and little people, uh, river waters, we don't see that. There's an different stakeholders understanding fishing, the ones that bring the product, but not the only one that is sold to the consumer. So in that process, there's somebody in the middle who is someone who has a lot more benefit in developing the commercialization of this. Perfect. Thank you very much. There are two more questions. Let's go with the first one. So in Costa Rica is the same as you can see in Ghana. It's the same phenomenon. It seems that it's the same study. And I was speaking with somebody else from Mexico, Salvador. It's the same characteristics of the fishermen in the coast area. So, do you call the artisan fisher the 3 mile range fisher? Yes. So the question was, in that research, you have not linked it to other Central American countries because there's an effect that we were analyzing. We're Coast Guards, but we work with Incopesca as well. And we were analyzing that it seems that something very important they have there is the finance education. They don't have education at all, but that is much more less. So the pain that Central America has with fishers is that is where we can start maybe changing the life design that they have because they don't have that formation and training. That was about a comment. Let's hear this question now. Thank you. So the categorization that you do of the demographics of these fishermen, it indicates that 95% are men, but my question here is women. What were you able to identify from them? What role do they play in this activity, this productive activity, and even in the same value chain? I imagine that this has some kind of incidence. And in the final reflections, in the last point, you did a comment that is very interesting. That has been a research line to be worked on, which is the relationship between the conservation and environmental policies versus the survival activity that has to be done. So in this case, we also identified that there are experiences based on environmental governance from fishermen and communitary networks, and how does that affect in the formalization of the search for improvements of their own activity? A short question we have back here so that we can add questions. It's very short. It's just that it caught my attention what happens in the Atlantic because there's only 2 points of formal fishing between all the populations and locations that we saw. Let's look at the answers. Let's start with the last one, which is what we remember. Is there any biologist? What have biologists said about the Atlantic? Because in Panama, it's very common to signal and point out an element with a biological barrier in the Atlantic that does not allow this line. I don't know if that's true, but it's a less developed area in the Atlantic. So there's Comarca Cunayala, a natural reservoir governed and capitalized by them. And then Colon, which is practically, we do have fishing, but there's little. There are communities where there are fishermen. But for us, it's not very symbolic because there was about 15 or 20, 25. We started working with those that had more than 200 fishermen, a site with more than 200. And this is the number that we were looking for. This is what happens in the Atlantic. If we have little development while seeing little distribution of the municipalities in this area, let's remember that there's a topic in Boca del Toro, and now we are adding the fact that a community has had a lot of effect in terms of the mining topic in Panama that started being more important starting last year. Now, in terms of women, it's interesting that we found in the 2010 census that there was still two women related to fishing in a river, and mostly in indigenous areas. This is a sector that we understand that has been um, marginalized. Rural, also women and indigenous. So it's all these conditions together and household, head of household as well. The topic of paper as well. So what happens is that this categorization that we do is just that start step of what we really want to do about the fisheries. In terms of fishermen and rivers as well, we are just uh, identifying if it's worth it or not. But I believe so. But there's a lot of data. What we presented is a lot of data, but little theory. Theory is clear. Now we have to sit down and figure it out. In terms of governance and communities, I believe Rita left. Rita is the one that has a lot of work in terms of governance, fishing communities, associations. He has worked directly with this group out there on the field. I'm in the office. I am about taking the census, breaking it down, and composing it. So that's where I get to with my knowledge. Go ahead, Rita, if you want to add something. Well, in terms of governance, an issue to other members in the primary sector. For example, there's already a communitary organization in livestock and agriculture, but for fishing, the only example that is already happening is the operator in the Darien province. There's an organization that they have been organized as a union. There's a change in their fishing that as an activity. So we have not found it yet in another activity, and it's probable that it exists. That will lead us to investigating and researching on the field with the fisherman to see if there is some kind of, if there was ever some kind of organization in it's the only case of being able to find a military organization in fishing. Perfect. Just last question. If there was any other one, you can raise your hand. Regarding the use of the results in data, in the sense that you have identified the fishing community, we know as intersectoral and multiple vulnerabilities that are present in a single community or person. But I ask myself if in Panama there's a use of the results to direct public policies and foster any kind of decision making in favor of these conditions. I believe there's no science if we don't get to that. So that's key. The central element of the categorization is precisely to see what community we select and what objects we select. So with this categorization, we already have our base and pillar in numbers to understand if we want this community because of the potential that they have, because it's majority, because there's a lot, and we're going to work with this. That is precisely the topic of the characterization. But evidently, yes, I think that from what we are going to generate, we should establish that public policies process. Apart from the fact that it is financed by National Secretary for Science and Technology. But it is precisely a job directly with fishermen. But we needed to categorize all this to understand what river would get into it. We already knew it, but it's part of a justification of the research and the study.
Rita, not sure if you want to add anything to this. I'm here, but I didn't hear the last part. The use of the information for political decision making. It's been more still what Paul mentioned. The idea is that, for example, with this research, we have been able to see that there's a reduction in water fishing as an example. What this leads to is to formulate within our results one project or another that's linked to being able to generate a policy or generate an alternative project to be able to keep that activity, be it as a subsistence activity for the community itself, for the fishermen, but also at a country level. These are recommendations that, in terms of concrete results, but that will be determined also by the research or the next process. Fishermen they know where to throw the line. You could stay maybe 3 hours, they end up fishing anything. And that's inquiry or observation. About that list that you mentioned, I've worked in coastal patrimony for a while and I completed research. And this step is the Afro-Desert population and the indigenous population that safeguards those fishing. That's what is the subsistence itself. It has to deal with safeguarding the legacy, historical culture, which is one of our Latin American countries. As an significant person so I think it's very valuable to do research. Congratulate you both. And I would dare to suspect, not to suspect, I'm sure that you're managing the most problematic country in fishermen in the South, in the Caribbean. When we, as well as Panama, we have collapsed recently, and that denounces this type of thing. Observant song. And it talks about this phenomenon associated to certain groups historically and safeguarded. So thank you very much, and I would love to read that sample. Thank you very much. And so thinking about you, so one of the I don't know, system. Not on the document to perform the exercise needs issue. So that also is something that can fishing, you know, that's not correct. Using this for building. It's going to be interesting reading that link with this project. And to close, we want to thank I think is here in the coastal communities that we're going to be working along with him and his coordination and the entire team. And thank you for the attention you gave us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very good presentation. things that we see highlight those in perspectives really discipline technology, math, engineering, sociology, marine, biology, how all of them look to contribute in a different way to the field of development fishing communities and sustainability of the ocean. So, thank you very much for attending this panel of participants, and I wish you happy return to your activities and that you enjoy the rest of the study program for the Congress. Thank you very much.